Hi, my name is Claire Thompson, and I live in Portland, Oregon. If stories like this help you say the things you've carried for years but never voiced, I hope you'll stick around. And if you want more, you can quietly tap subscribe and be part of this small corner where we talk about family the way it really feels. Today's story is titled, Dad Never Said I Love You Until I Read His Diary, written about me every day. You think you know what love sounds like. You picture it warm and fluent, the way TV fathers toss it over their shoulders while flipping pancakes. But what if love is the sound of a coat hung on a peg at 5:42 a.m., the hiss of a kettle, the soft click of a porch light left on? What if love speaks in hands? My father, Richard, was a man of hands. Square, work-worn palms, the nails clean but always scored with a memory of his day. He could rewire a lamp without looking up from the baseball game. He could coax a stubborn lawnmower into purring with nothing more than a crescent wrench and a patient shrug. He knew the names of our neighbors' dogs, but rarely volunteered the name of the street where he'd grown up, or the town, or whether his own father had ever told him the thing I kept waiting to hear. He never said, "I love you." Not once. Not to me. Not the way I wanted. In Portland, rain is the city's second language. It teaches you to listen. To the soft drum on the awning, the eyelashes of droplets on a bus window. I used to listen for the words every daughter listens for, the three that are supposed to braid the loose fibers of your childhood into something strong enough to hold you when you leave home. I waited so long my ears got used to the quiet. When I was 9, I brought home a permission slip for a field trip to the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. I'd put a yellow star next to the line that read parent/guardian volunteer, yes/no. I slid the paper across the dinner table like a secret message. My father ate in the same way he did everything, methodical, unhurried. He read the slip and signed on the line where it asked for a parent's signature and handed it back, the pen already capped, the star unacknowledged. I remember thinking if he loved me, he'd circle yes. The next morning, he left for work before dawn. By the time I woke, my backpack was standing upright by the door. The front pocket bulged. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple polished to its best self, a tiny envelope of quarters for the gift shop, and a note written on the backside of a hardware store receipt. "Don't feed the dinosaurs." I laughed out loud there in my socks. I laughed, and then I felt a little angry because a joke was not the thing I had asked the sky for every night. Love, I decided, had a sound, and he wasn't making it. There's a park not far from where we live, the kind with swings whose chains clink like spoons in a drawer. On Saturdays, my father would take me there, never saying the phrase, never asking me deeper questions than, "How's your bike riding?" or "Wanna try the big slide?" But he would stand at the end of the slide, arms out, as if it were his job to be the net under the day. I remember we tried to skip stones in the Willamette, and mine flopped after one hop every time. He never corrected my wrist. He just waited until the river quieted, then put a flat stone in my palm, closed my fingers around it as though he were returning something that already belonged to me, and said, "Again." Sometimes love allows you the privacy of your mistakes. My mother spoke the language of warmth. She could say honey with 4 different meanings. She could look at me across a room and know whether I needed a glass of water or a joke. She filled the practical silences of our house with music. Fleetwood Mac when she folded laundry, Patsy Cline when she cooked. My father, though, moved through rooms like a weather front, steady barometric pressure, a dependable gray. You plan your day around the sky you have. You don't ask the clouds for declarations. There's a memory I return to when I try to measure the distance between my father and the words I wanted. I had just turned 12. Middle school is a wild country, and I was not a natural traveler. I came home one afternoon, cheeks still hot from a locker room joke I didn't understand until it turned on me. My father was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. He didn't look up when I entered. That much was normal. I opened the fridge, closed it, opened it again, just to make noise, the way a person on a deserted island bangs a pan to convince themselves there's still a village beyond the trees. "Hey, Claire," he said at last, as if we were two co-workers bumping into each other by the coffee machine. "There's leftover spaghetti. I'm not hungry." "All right," he said, in that neutral tone good men use when the world might be breaking inside a person they love, and they are afraid that if they touch it with the wrong word it will shatter completely. He removed one screw from the hinge, then another, added a washer, a tiny, almost invisible thing, the difference between wobble and steady, door and door. He worked until the cabinet closed with a soft click, the sound of the day repairing its own hinge. I wanted him to turn and say the words, 3 stitches in a straight line. Instead, he rinsed his hands and said, "Want to go for a drive?" We drove past Powell's, the windows holding their own weather of warm light and stacked spines. We drove across the St. John's Bridge, its green ribs carrying us over the gray ribbon of the river. The wipers marked time. My father doesn't fill silence the way some people do. He doesn't paste over it with chatter. He lets it be a room you can stand in without furniture. Somewhere near Forest Park, he asked, "Do you know how to tell if a tire's low just by the way the car feels?" "No," I said. I did not care about tires. I cared about the 3 words and how he would not fetch them from wherever men like him keep their softest supplies. He nodded as if he had expected that answer, and then he told me about pressure and pull, about a tug to the right that is not the road but the car itself asking for air, for a little attention. When we got home, he showed me the gauge. He pressed my thumb into the cold valve stem. He made room for me to be capable. Later, in my room, I thought of the boy in the locker room and the joke and the hurt that unspooled like thread through the afternoon. And I thought of air, how you can't see it but it holds you up just the same. When people ask me if my father was affectionate, I never know how to answer. Did he hug? Not much. Did he praise? Rarely. Did he listen? Yes, like a lake listens to a skipped stone, accepting the exact size and shape of each throw. It's hard to describe a man whose tenderness is calibrated to usefulness. He showed up for the things that squeaked and stalled. He kept the receipts for the things that might one day break. He did the math of the month. He checked the furnace before the first cold snap, as if his vigilance could change the angle of winter. And yet, the absence of those 3 words, how do you count a silence? It grew up around me like the ivy on our fence, inching along the edges, taking the shape of whatever it clung to. When I was 16 and earned an AP English, my mother tacked the paper to the corkboard by the phone. My father stood beside it, mug in hand, and I watched his eyes scan the red ink, the neat loops of my teacher's encouragement. He tapped the corner of the page with one finger. "You worked hard," he said. Then he went to refill the bird feeder. Another girl might have heard what was underneath it. Pride, respect, even love. I heard a report, a mechanic's assessment, adequate as expected, proceed. I learned to speak the language I needed in other rooms. In college dorm kitchens, in late-night diners, in too loud bars where the jukebox chooses your mood for you. I learned to say, "I love you" to friends with my whole mouth because I thought maybe, if I said it enough, it would teach my father how. But every time I flew home for a holiday, each time I pulled my suitcase into the familiar garage smell of oil and cedar shavings, the house remembered me the way a book remembers a bookmark. I took my old place at the table. He took his. My mother slid the rolls into the oven and overcompensated with conversation, and somewhere between the salad and the pie I would stage a small rebellion. "I love you," I'd say, experimentally, the way you throw a rope across a small canyon to see if it catches. My mother would catch it. She always did. She'd say, "I love you too, baby," and pat my wrist. My father would clear his throat. "You need the car tomorrow," he'd ask, or, "Weather looks rough on I-5, we should leave early if we're going to the coast." He was not ignoring me. He was offering the thing he trusted, a plan, a way forward, a practical arm around the shoulder of the day. But I wanted love in a sentence, not in a schedule. If you're listening and recognizing the pattern, maybe you've lived it. You measure, you compare, you tally other people's fathers against your own. At a friend's wedding, I watched a dad toast his daughter with a speech so wet with adoration I felt like we might all need towels afterward. He threw his arms around her and declared, "I have loved you every day of your life." The room hooted and dabbed its eyes, and my chest got tight with a small, disreputable jealousy. We went home early that night, my father's hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, the dashboard light turning his profile a shade of blue that made him look like a stranger sitting where my father should be. On bad days, I decided he was withholding. On better days, I told myself he had been taught by a different country, one where men planted words and waited forever for the harvest. Mostly, I told myself nothing. You live with a quiet the way you live with the creek behind your house. You stop hearing it until one day, for whatever reason, you can't hear anything else. One winter evening, clear, cold, the kind of night where you can see your own breath and it feels like a ghost leaving your body and returning, our power went out. My mother lit candles. My father sighed the soft sigh of a man who knows exactly which breaker has betrayed him. He put on his coat and disappeared into the garage with a flashlight. I followed. He stood over the open panel like a surgeon. "Hold this," he said, and put the flashlight in my hands. The beam shook a little because I was shivering, but also because I was 13 and the person whose approval I craved was right there, his attention as narrow and bright as the circle of light we were making together. He worked until the house exhaled and the lamps woke up. He did not turn to me and say the line I'd scripted for him. He patted my shoulder once, absent-mindedly, the way you thank the moon for the tide. Sometimes I wonder, if he had said it then, would I have believed him? Or did I need the long hunger to make sense of the feast that would come much later? I don't know. I only know this. A child who is loved in gestures will spend the first half of her life misreading a dictionary and the second half learning a new language. Chapter 1 is the chapter where you misunderstand, faithfully, like it's your job. On my 30th birthday, a Tuesday, my mother organized a small dinner. Lasagna, a store cake with frosting too sweet and a baseball of piped roses on top. My father arrived with a paper bag from the hardware store. He set it on the counter, kissed my mother on the cheek, nodded at me. I opened the bag expecting a practical joke, a bundle of zip ties, a handful of brass screws, some weird, daddish token. Inside was a smoke detector with batteries. "Newer model," he said. "Better sensor." My mother rolled her eyes affectionately. I almost laughed. What kind of person brings a smoke detector to a birthday? The kind who stays up at night, imagining the one ember you missed when you blew out the candles. The kind who cannot say the words but will not risk your life for their absence. Later, after cake, after my mother had gone upstairs to check on laundry she had no intention of folding that night, he stood in my apartment's narrow hallway and installed the smoke detector above my bedroom door. He didn't ask. He just did it. He tested the alarm and it shouted its little metallic panic into the evening. "See," he said. "That's a good sound." I nodded. It was loud, unpleasant. But when he left and the door latched and the hallway went back to being the same anonymous tunnel that had brought me a dozen pizza deliveries and 100 mornings of rushing, I looked up at the round, watchful face of the thing, and I heard what he had meant. A good sound is not always a pretty one. Not all I love yous are pretty. If you're still here, if any part of this feels familiar, Maybe you're listening for your own version of those 3 words. Maybe you're bracing for a twist, the way a reader feels the page thicken toward a reveal. I won't rush it. Some doors you open slowly because the rooms behind them have been closed for years, and the air needs a moment to remember how to move. This is just the first room. This is me at 34, learning to lay out the foundation of a house I thought I'd already lived in. This is me telling you about the man who fixed hinges, who left notes on receipts, who brought a smoke detector to my birthday, and taught me how to tell when a tire needs air by the way a car pulls to the side. I used to think chapter 1 was proof that I was unloved. Now I see it for what it is. The distance between a father's language and a daughter's ear. The space where the echo gets lost. If you recognize it, you're not alone. And if you come with me into chapter 2, I'll show you how that space gets wider before it gets small, how grief walks in without knocking, how silence hardens into a wall you think you cannot climb. For now, I'll leave you here with the simple truth that begins everything else. My father never said, "I love you," and I never stopped waiting to hear it. When I think back to my teenage years, the image that comes most vividly is the dinner table. Not the food, not the laughter, because there wasn't much of that, but the silence. My mother tried to bridge it, filling the space with stories from her day, with questions about homework, with reminders about dentist appointments. But my father, he sat at the head of the table like a lighthouse with its beam turned inward, steady but unreadable. He ate methodically, fork in left hand, knife in right, chewing slowly as though life required exact precision even in the smallest things. And me, I sat across from him, waiting, always waiting, for one sentence, one crack in the armor. It never came. The silence at dinner became its own character in our home. Sometimes it was comforting, like a blanket you wrap around yourself on cold nights. Other times it was suffocating, pressing against my chest until I wanted to scream just to prove we were a family and not strangers sharing a roof. My friends would complain about their fathers being too strict, too nosy, too loud. I envied that. Noise meant presence. Noise meant someone cared enough to notice you. I had quiet, and quiet can feel like absence if you're not taught to read it as love. At school, my friends compared stories. One said her dad wrote her notes in her lunchbox, silly doodles, jokes, little affirmations like "you're my sunshine." Another boasted that her father had yelled himself hoarse cheering at her soccer game. I nodded, smiled, pretended to understand. Inside, I burned, not because I wanted silly notes or someone shouting from the bleachers, but because I wanted something unmistakable, something that erased all doubt. I wanted my father to look at me and say 3 words that would anchor me to him in ways silence never could. But he never did. Instead, he showed up in ways I didn't recognize then. He drove me to early morning band practice in the freezing rain, coffee steaming in his thermos, heater blasting in the truck. He sat in the parking lot until the lights flicked on, just to make sure I wasn't alone in the dark. He checked the oil in my car before I ever thought to, left $20 bills tucked into the glove compartment for emergencies, though he never said the words out loud. These were his love letters, but I wasn't fluent in his language yet. All I saw was absence, when really, he was present in ways too quiet for a 16-year-old girl to appreciate. The gap between us widened after Mom got sick. Cancer crept into our home like a thief, stealing her laughter first, then her energy, then the light in her eyes. She still tried, God bless her, to fill the silence. Even on the days when she could barely lift her head, she would ask about my day, remind me to take a jacket, tell me she loved me. She said it so much, I started to believe she was saying it for both of them as though she knew my father never would. I remember one night, after a brutal round of chemo, I sat at the edge of her bed. She reached for my hand, her fingers thin, trembling. "Claire," she whispered. Don't be too hard on your father. He loves you. He just doesn't always know how to say it. I wanted to believe her, but when I glanced at him standing in the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable, I couldn't. How could a man who never said the words be trusted to feel them? My teenage heart turned bitter. I thought silence was proof of indifference, and I wore that belief like armor. After Mom passed, the house became unbearable. Her voice was gone, and with it, the bridge between us. My father retreated further into himself. He fixed things around the house as though repairing broken cabinets could substitute for repairing a broken daughter. I grieved loudly, crying in my room, slamming doors, throwing words like stones. He grieved silently, by waking up at dawn, by working longer hours, by keeping his sorrow locked behind eyes that looked past me instead of into me. The night of her funeral, I broke. I sat on the porch, shivering in the cold, tears streaking down my face. I wanted him to come out to sit beside me, to wrap an arm around me and say what I had waited my whole life to hear. Instead, he stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching long in the porch light. "You should get some rest," he said. That was it. 4 words, not the right ones, not even close. I hated him for it. By the time I turned 21, I couldn't stand it anymore. I packed my bags and left for New York, chasing a future that had nothing to do with the quiet house on the rainy streets of Portland. I told myself I was escaping him, but really, I was running from the ache of never being enough. I called him once a week out of duty, the conversations short and clipped. "How's work?" he'd ask. "Fine," I'd answer. "Car running okay?" he'd ask. "Yes," I'd say. That was the rhythm of our relationship, practical, shallow, void of the words I craved. Yet even in New York, the silence followed me. When I moved into my first apartment, a package arrived from Portland. A toolbox, neatly organized, with a note inside that read, "You'll need this." No signature, but I knew it was from him. Another time, after my car broke down in the city, I opened the glove compartment and found $50 I didn't remember putting there. He had slipped it in the last time he visited, quietly ensuring I'd have what I needed even in his absence. Still, I dismissed these gestures as obligation, not love. I told myself he was a man of duty, not of affection. I resented him for giving me everything but the one thing I wanted. Looking back now, I realize those years were the breaking point. I defined love so narrowly that I couldn't see it staring me in the face. He was showing me every day, in sandwiches, in quarters, in gas tanks filled before I noticed they were low. But I was blind, because I wanted fireworks when what he offered was steady candlelight. And so I carried the wound with me, into college, into relationships, into adulthood. I looked for men who could say the words loudly, passionately, recklessly. I thought if I could hear them enough, I would fill the void my father left. But no matter how many times a boyfriend whispered, "I love you," it never landed the way I needed, because the truth is you can't patch over a father-shaped silence with someone else's voice. The years stretched. Calls grew fewer, visits rarer, and the gap between us widened into a canyon I didn't think could ever be crossed. At the time, I thought I was right, that his silence proved his lack of love. But later, when I held the diaries in my hands, when I read his words written in ink instead of voice, I would realize how wrong I had been. That realization, of course, belongs to another chapter. For now, all you need to know is this. By the end of those years, I was convinced my father did not love me, and I carried that conviction like a stone in my pocket, heavy, always there, shaping the way I walked through the world. Grief has a strange way of magnifying silence. When my mother died, it was as if the little bridge that once connected my father and me crumbled overnight. She had been the interpreter between us, translating his quiet gestures into words I could understand. Without her, I felt stranded on one side of the river and he on the other, neither of us knowing how to cross. I remember the night she passed more vividly than I wish I did. Hospitals have a smell, antiseptic, metallic, with a faint undercurrent of despair. I had sat by her bed for hours, clutching her hand, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "I'll be okay, Mom," I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. She looked at me with those tired but luminous eyes and said, "Claire, don't let the silence fool you. Your father loves you more than anything." They were her last words to me, and they lodged themselves deep inside, not as comfort, but as a puzzle I couldn't solve. When she finally slipped away, my father was there, standing at the foot of the bed. He didn't cry, not a tear. His face was carved from stone, his hands clasped behind his back as though he were standing at attention, a soldier refusing to break formation. I wanted him to break. I wanted him to sob, to collapse into me, to finally expose the love he had kept hidden. Instead, he placed his hand gently on her foot, bowed his head for a moment, and walked out of the room. Just like that. No words, no embrace. Just footsteps fading down the sterile hallway. That night, at home, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, shaking with grief. I wanted him to come out and sit beside me. I wanted him to put his arm around my shoulders and whisper that somehow, despite everything, we would get through this together. But when he did appear in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the light from the living room, all he said was, "You should get some rest." Then he turned and left. 4 words. That was all he could manage, and it felt like nothing at all. In the weeks that followed, the house became unbearable. Every corner reminded me of her. The kitchen still carried the scent of cinnamon from her baking. Her knitting needles lay abandoned on the coffee table, the half-finished scarf drooping like a broken promise. My father moved through the house like a ghost, fixing things obsessively. The squeaky door hinge, the loose step on the porch, the leaking faucet. It was as if repairing objects could substitute for repairing us. I, on the other hand, grew louder in my grief. I slammed doors, I screamed into pillows, I played music too loud, trying to drown out the silence. We became caricatures of our coping mechanisms, him the fixer, me the destroyer. The argument started small. "Why can't you just talk to me?" I'd demand. "What do you want me to say?" He'd respond, his voice flat. "Anything," I'd cry. "Just say you love me, just once." His silence would hang in the air like smoke, choking me until I stormed off to my room, my anger doubling back on itself because no matter how much noise I made, he never matched it. One evening, after yet another fight, I found myself in the kitchen staring at the empty chair where my mother used to sit. The ache was unbearable. I turned to him, my voice shaking with fury. "You didn't even love her, did you? You didn't love her and you don't love me. You don't love anyone." For the first time, I saw a flicker in his eyes, something raw, something dangerous. But he didn't raise his voice. He simply tightened his jaw and said, "Don't talk about things you don't understand." Then he walked out of the room. That was his way. Retreat, retreat, retreat. But to me, it felt like confirmation. Silence, again, where I needed words. By the time I turned 21, I couldn't take it anymore. I applied to colleges on the other side of the country, determined to escape the suffocating quiet of our house. When the acceptance letter from a New York university arrived, I packed my bags without hesitation. My father drove me to the airport, the silence between us louder than the roar of departing planes. As we pulled up to the curb, I waited one last time for him to say the words. He didn't. He simply unloaded my suitcase, patted the hood of the car like it was the only thing he could trust, and said, "Take care of yourself." That was it. That was our goodbye. No hug, no tears, no "I love you." Just 4 more words that felt like nails in the coffin of our relationship. I walked away without looking back, convinced that I had been right all along. My father didn't love me. In New York, I tried to build a new life. I threw myself into classes, into friendships, into relationships. But no matter how far I ran, the silence followed me. It was in the way I bristled when someone hesitated before saying, "I love you." It was in the way I clung too tightly to people who said it easily, as though their words could erase the absence of his. It was in the way I avoided phone calls from Portland because I couldn't stand the small talk, the weather updates, the mechanical concern about my car. Every time the phone rang and his name appeared on the screen, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I'd answer out of duty, the conversation's always the same. "How's work?" he'd ask. "Fine," I'd reply. "How's the car?" "Running okay." "Good. Keep up with the oil changes." Then silence. Awkward, heavy silence until one of us hung up. Sometimes I'd stare at the phone afterward, wondering why I even answered. Why did I keep hoping for something different when I knew better? Why did I still crave the words from a man who had made it abundantly clear he wasn't going to say them? Looking back now, I realized that was the breaking point of our relationship. Grief had built a wall between us, and instead of tearing it down together, we fortified our sides. He hid behind silence. I hid behind anger, and the bridge my mother once held together with her words was gone, washed away in the flood of her absence. At the time, I thought it was final. I thought the story of my father and me ended at that airport curb with 4 empty words and a lifetime of silence. I couldn't have known then that the story was only beginning, that the diaries, hidden in the back of his closet, would one day tell me everything he never could. But that revelation belonged to another chapter. For now, all I knew was this: my father had failed me, or at least that's what I believed. And I carried that belief into every relationship, every choice, every corner of my life, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The months after Mom's funeral passed in a blur of gray skies and heavy air. Portland has always been a rainy city, but that winter it felt like the heavens were conspiring with our grief. Every morning I would wake to the soft patter against the window, and instead of comfort, it felt like mockery, raindrops like tears falling where my father and I refused to shed them. He threw himself into work. I would hear the garage door at 6 a.m., the growl of the truck starting, and then silence until late at night when he returned. Sometimes I pretended to be asleep, but really I would lie there in the dark, ears tuned to the sound of his boots on the porch, the jingle of his keys, the faint thud of him setting down his lunch pail. These were the only signs that he was still alive, still in the same house, even if it felt like we lived in 2 separate worlds. I, too, found my escapes. I lingered at school, at friends' houses, anywhere but home. When I did come back, we circled each other like wary strangers, speaking only when necessary. He would ask, "Gas tank full?" or "Did you check the oil?" As though car maintenance was the highest expression of fatherhood. I would answer with clipped words, sometimes not even looking at him. And always, beneath it all, the unspoken plea, "Why can't you just say you love me?" The fights grew sharper. One evening I came home past curfew, drenched from the rain, mascara streaked from crying after a breakup with a boy who had tossed around "I love you" like confetti. My father was waiting in the living room, arms crossed, expression carved in stone. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked. I snapped. At least he said he loved me. That's more than you've ever done. The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I thought he might yell, finally let loose the anger I sensed simmering beneath his skin. But instead, he turned away, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. "Go to bed, Claire," was all he said. I hated him for his restraint, for his refusal to meet my fury with his own. Silence again, always silence. The house itself began to betray us. Without Mom's laughter to stitch the rooms together, everything felt cold. Her perfume lingered faintly in the hallway. Her recipes sat untouched in the kitchen drawer. Her voice echoed in my memory at odd hours. Sometimes I would catch my father standing at the window, staring out into the rain, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. But when I approached, he straightened, masking the grief, retreating behind that familiar wall. One night, I found him in the garage, sitting in the dark. The smell of motor oil hung in the air. He had one of Mom's scarves in his hands, turning it over like it was something fragile and holy. For a second, I saw the truth, that he was broken too, just in a quieter way. But instead of saying anything, I slammed the door, angry at him for hiding his pain where I couldn't reach it. By the time I graduated high school, the distance between us felt permanent. My friends' fathers clapped them on the back, shouted their pride from the bleachers. Mine sat silently in the crowd, hands folded, expression unreadable. Afterward, he handed me an envelope with a check inside. Money he had been saving, no doubt, for this very moment. Practical, predictable, but no words. College was my escape hatch. I applied to schools far from Portland, praying for a chance to reinvent myself somewhere he couldn't overshadow me. When I got into a university in New York, I felt relief wash over me like absolution. Finally, I could leave behind the silence that had become my inheritance. The morning of my flight, he drove me to the airport. It was still dark, the highway slick with rain. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? I watched the wipers swish back and forth, a metronome counting down to my freedom. My heart pounded with conflicting emotions, grief, anger, hope, fear. At the terminal, he pulled up to the curb and unloaded my suitcase. I stood there, waiting for the miracle, for him to break the pattern, to grab me, to say what I had longed to hear since childhood. But he didn't. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Take care of yourself." 4 words, always 4 words. I nodded, swallowed my disappointment, and walked away without looking back. I told myself it was the end of the story, that I was closing the door on him for good. But of course, life has a way of reopening doors you thought were sealed shut. In New York, I tried to fill the silence with noise. I immersed myself in classes, stayed out late with friends, dated men who said, "I love you," too quickly. But no matter how often I heard the words, they slid off me like water on glass. Something in me didn't believe them because the one voice I had always needed to hear them from had never spoken. At night, in my dorm room, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of that airport curb. "Take care of yourself." The words echoed in my mind, hollow and heavy, until they became less like advice and more like a curse. I thought I had escaped him, but the truth was, I had only carried him with me in a different form. The silence lodged inside me, shaping the way I loved, the way I trusted, the way I lived. That was the breaking point, not just of our relationship, but of the way I understood love. I believed then that it was conditional, selective, fragile. I believed that if my own father couldn't say the words, maybe no one ever truly meant them. Of course, I would one day learn how wrong I was, but that revelation was buried in the pages of a diary I had not yet found. The months after my mother's death stretched on like an endless season. Grief rearranged the furniture of our house, leaving everything familiar but slightly wrong, like a picture frame tilted on the wall that no one bothers to straighten. The kitchen became the loneliest room. My mother's apron still hung on the hook behind the pantry door, faint traces of flour smudged across the fabric. Sometimes I would press it to my face, desperate for the fading scent of cinnamon and soap, but even that betrayed me, growing fainter with each week. My father still made coffee every morning, still read the newspaper at the table, but without her voice filling the space, the air felt heavy. His silence grew larger, more suffocating, until I wanted to scream just to hear an echo. I threw myself into distractions, school clubs, late nights at friends' houses, anything that kept me away from the oppressive quiet of home. But no matter where I went, grief followed me like a shadow. At night, lying in bed, I would hear my father moving through the house. The creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator door, the occasional cough muffled behind closed doors. Each sound was a reminder that he was still there, still alive but unreachable. We were like 2 planets orbiting the same sun, aware of each other's gravity but unable to collide. Our arguments became routine. They always started small, A forgotten chore, a curfew missed, a grade that slipped. But beneath each argument was the same wound, the words he would not say. One night, after coming home late from a party, he was waiting in the living room, the lamp casting a harsh light across his face. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I wanted him to explode, to show me some raw emotion, anything that proved he cared. Instead, I snapped. "At least other people tell me they love me. You never do, not once." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, pain, maybe, or anger, but he swallowed it down like always. "Go to bed, Claire," he said, turning his gaze back to the muted television. I stormed upstairs, but the words burned in my chest. Why can't you just say it? Why is it so hard? Grief made me cruel. I threw accusations like knives, daring him to bleed. "You didn't even love her." I spat once during an argument about cleaning out Mom's things. "You can't even say you loved her." His face went pale, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. But he didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He simply left the room, the slam of the back door his only response. I sat on the floor afterward, sobbing into my hands, hating him for his silence and hating myself for the cruelty I couldn't seem to stop. Everywhere I looked, my mother's absence magnified his failure. At school events, friends' parents clapped and cheered while mine sat stoically, hands folded, face unreadable. At birthdays, my friends received heartfelt cards, their fathers writing, "We're so proud of you," in bold letters. Mine handed me a gift card with a muttered, "Don't spend it all at once." Practical, predictable, empty. By the time I graduated, I felt hollowed out. I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd for his face. He was there, of course, sitting stiffly in his seat. When I held up my diploma, he gave me a small nod, the barest flicker of pride. Afterward, he handed me an envelope with a check inside, money he had been saving for years. No words, no embrace, just a transaction. That summer, I decided I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. The silence pressed against me like a weight, so I applied to colleges as far away as possible, hoping distance would give me relief. When I was accepted to a university in New York, I felt an almost giddy sense of freedom. Finally, I could escape the suffocating quiet, the constant ache of waiting for something that would never come. The weeks before I left were filled with a strange mixture of preparation and avoidance. I packed boxes, sorted through old belongings, and ignored the tension that hummed in the air. He helped load my suitcases into the car, his movements efficient, deliberate. He never asked why I chose New York. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he didn't want to admit it. The night before my flight, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, except for the faint buzz of the refrigerator. I wondered if he was lying awake too, just down the hall, thinking the same things I was. I wanted to go to him, to ask one more time, to beg for the words, but pride, anger, and fear held me back. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. The next morning, he drove me to the airport. The rain fell steadily, wipers clicking back and forth as we sat in silence. I kept waiting for him to speak, to tell me he was proud, to say he loved me. But all he asked was, "Got your ID? Enough cash for the cab?" When we pulled up to the terminal, he got out, unloaded my suitcase, and stood there, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. I looked at him, one last chance, one final plea written across my face. He met my eyes, his expression unreadable, and said, "Take care of yourself." 4 words, always 4 words. I swallowed hard, nodded, and turned away. I didn't hug him, I didn't say goodbye. I walked into the terminal, my chest heavy, my eyes burning. I told myself this was it, the end, that I was finally free of his silence. But freedom is a complicated thing. In New York, surrounded by noise and lights and people who said, "I love you," without hesitation, I still felt the weight of his absence. Every phone call that ended without those words, every holiday card signed only Dad, every small reminder of what was missing, It all followed me. I had left Portland to escape him, but really, I carried him with me in the form of an unanswered question. Why couldn't he say it? That was the breaking point, not just of our relationship, but of who I believed I was. I thought his silence defined me, proved I was unworthy of love. And I lived with that belief for years, until the day I discovered the diaries that would rewrite everything I thought I knew. Years slipped by in New York like pages torn from a calendar. At first, I thought distance would heal me. I told myself I could build a life without the silence that haunted me in Portland. I buried myself in classes, in internships, in nights out with friends. I dated men who said, "I love you," with such ease it almost sounded rehearsed. I let their words wash over me like water, hoping they would seep into the cracks my father had left. But deep inside, the silence still echoed. Every phone call with him reminded me they never lasted more than 5 minutes. "How's work?" he'd ask. "Fine," I'd reply. "Car running okay?" "Yes." "All right then." Sometimes we'd sit there, both breathing, neither knowing how to cross the distance. He never asked about my heart, my struggles, my fears. And of course, he never said the words. Each time I hung up, I felt emptier than before. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in late autumn. I was at my desk, papers strewn across the surface, the city lights glittering through the window. My phone buzzed. The number was from Portland. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe dread, made me pick up. It was my aunt, her voice trembling. "Claire," she said, "it's your father. He's in the hospital. It's serious. You should come." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. I asked questions. What happened? How bad? But the answers blurred. All I heard was the urgency in her tone. I booked the earliest flight. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Memories crashed over me. His silence at Mom's funeral, his words at the airport, the years of distance. I thought about the diaries I didn't yet know existed, about the unspoken love I still doubted. I told myself not to expect miracles. He was who he was. Still, a part of me ached for one final chance. When the plane touched down in Portland, the sky was heavy with rain. It always rained there, as if the city itself never stopped mourning. I rented a car and drove straight to the hospital, windshield wipers clicking like a metronome of dread. The sterile smell hit me as soon as I stepped into his room. Machines beeped steadily, tubes snaked across his frail body. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken beneath the white sheets. His hands, those hands that once fixed every broken thing, now trembled against the mattress. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. This was the man who had haunted me my entire life. The man I had tried to escape. And yet, seeing him like this, so fragile, my anger cracked, replaced by something heavier, grief, fear, regret. "Hi, Dad," I whispered. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw relief. "Claire," he said, voice hoarse. "You came." I sat by his bed, unsure what to do with my hands. I wanted to reach for his, but something held me back. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of machines. "How are you feeling?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. He gave a small shrug. "Doctor says not long." He said it plainly, like he was reporting the weather. No fear, no drama, just a fact. I blinked back tears. "Why didn't you call me yourself?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "Didn't want to bother you." That answer pierced me more than any argument we'd ever had. Even on his deathbed, he couldn't admit he needed me. He couldn't say the words. Over the next few days, I visited daily. I brought books, magazines, little things to fill the silence. Sometimes we talked about practical things like bills, the house, who would take care of the lawn. Never about the things that mattered. Each time I tried to steer the conversation toward emotions, he deflected. One evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad," I said, voice shaking, "why could you never just tell me? Why couldn't you ever say you loved me?" He looked at me for a long moment. His lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he reached for my hand. His grip was weak, trembling, but steady enough to hold me there. "Take care of yourself, Claire," he whispered. 4 words, again, always 4 words. I broke then. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand more. But looking at his frail face, I realized he didn't have more to give, not in the way I wanted. The next morning, he was gone. The nurse called me at dawn. I drove to the hospital in a daze, rain pounding on the windshield. When I entered the room, his bed was already empty, the sheets folded neatly. Just like that, he had slipped away, leaving me with a lifetime of silence. At the funeral, people spoke of his kindness, his reliability, his quiet strength. Neighbors told stories of how he fixed their fences, shoveled their driveways, lent them money without asking for it back. They wept for him in ways I couldn't. I sat in the pew, numb, the words, "Take care of yourself," echoing in my mind like a cruel joke. I thought that was the end, that I would carry his silence as my inheritance forever, that I would never know for sure whether he loved me. Of course, I didn't yet know about the diaries waiting for me in his closet, pages upon pages where he had written the words I longed for every single day. But in that moment, standing at his grave with the rain soaking through my dress, I felt only the finality of goodbye. My father had left this world without ever telling me he loved me, and it shattered me. After the funeral, the silence followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. Portland's skies wept for days, gray rain pooling in the gutters, streaking across the windshield as I drove to my father's house for the first time without him there. The key felt heavier in my hand than it ever had. When I pushed open the door, the familiar creak of the hinges sounded different, lonelier, as though the house itself knew its master was gone. The air inside was stale, mixed with the faint scent of motor oil, coffee, and the aftershave he always used. Everything was as he had left it, his jacket hanging by the door, his boots lined neatly on the mat, yesterday's newspaper folded on the kitchen table. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, half expecting him to appear, to grumble about me leaving the door open too long, to ask if I'd checked the oil in my car. But of course, he didn't. The silence was absolute. I had come to do what no daughter ever wants to do, clean out her father's life. The lawyer had said it would be best to start sorting his belongings soon, to decide what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. The very idea made me sick. How could I reduce him to piles and boxes? How could I dismantle a life that, for all its silence, had been the foundation of mine? I started in the kitchen. Each drawer felt like an invasion. I found his stash of rubber bands, the collection of batteries he always swore still had a little life left. His handwriting appeared on scraps of paper, grocery lists, measurements, phone numbers with no names. I held them like relics, as if his presence clung to the ink. In the living room, I found the remote control lined up perfectly on the coffee table, his reading glasses resting on top of a crossword puzzle half-finished. I ran my fingers across the arm of his chair, the fabric worn from years of use. How many nights had he sat here, quiet, while I longed for him to say something, anything. That would tell me I mattered. The weight of regret pressed on me until I couldn't breathe. The hardest room was his bedroom. It felt like stepping into a space I was never meant to enter. The bed was made with military precision, his slippers tucked neatly beneath. On the dresser, his watch lay beside a photograph of me at age 10, holding a trophy from a school spelling bee. I stared at that photo for a long time. He had kept it all these years, right where he would see it every morning. Why that photo? Why me, at 10, smiling awkwardly, clutching proof that I was worth something? I opened the closet, bracing myself for the sight of his shirts hanging in orderly rows. They smelled of him, soap and sawdust, a faint trace of the outdoors. I buried my face in the fabric and felt tears spill hot down my cheeks. Grief came in waves, and this one knocked me to my knees. It was while clearing the top shelf that I found them. At first, I thought it was just a stack of old notebooks, their leather covers worn, edges frayed. They were tied together with twine tucked behind a box of winter scarves. Curiosity stirred, fragile and hesitant. I carried the stack to the bed, sat down, and untied the bundle. The top notebook was dated the year I was born. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page stopped me cold. Claire was born today. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She has her mother's eyes. I don't know how to say it out loud, but I love her more than I ever thought possible. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked hard, rereading the sentence, needing to be sure. I love her. There it was in his handwriting, the 3 words I had begged for all my life. My hands shook as I turned the page. She smiled for the first time today. I think it was at me. God, I love her smile. She took her first steps, fell twice but got back up. I'm so proud. I love her courage. Every entry was about me, about my milestones, my struggles, my victories, and every single one ended with the same phrase, I love her. The sobs came before I could stop them. I clutched the journal to my chest, rocking back and forth, years of pain colliding with this revelation. All the silence, all the distance, it hadn't been absence. It had been love, unspoken but written, poured onto these pages every single day. I reached for the second notebook, then the third. They spanned years. Childhood, adolescence, even the years after I left for New York. He had written about my school plays, my teenage tantrums, my college acceptance. He wrote about missing me, about wishing he knew how to bridge the gap. One entry from the year Mom died shattered me. Claire thinks I don't love her. I can see it in her eyes, the way she looks at me with anger. I wish I could tell her. The words get stuck. I love her more than life, but when I open my mouth, nothing comes. Maybe one day she'll understand. Maybe she'll forgive me. I pressed my hand to my mouth, sobbing into the empty room. He had known. He had seen my pain, felt my accusations, and still he loved me. He just couldn't say it out loud. Hours passed as I devoured page after page. The notebooks piled around me like a fortress of truth. Each entry was a thread, weaving a tapestry of love I had never recognized. He hadn't been silent. He had been speaking all along, just in ink instead of voice. As the sun set, casting the room in golden light, I realized something profound. My father had told me I love you thousands of times. I had simply never known where to listen. I gathered the diaries to my chest, tears still streaming, and whispered into the empty room, I love you too, Dad. For the first time, I believed it wasn't too late. The days after finding the diaries blurred together, but in a different way than the days after his death. Grief had painted everything gray, muffling sounds, slowing time. But the diaries, those worn leather volumes stacked like bricks of his hidden heart, brought color back into the world, though not in a gentle way. It was overwhelming, blinding, like staring at the sun after years in shadow. I carried the notebooks with me everywhere, as if setting them down would let the silence creep back. At night, I read until my eyes burned, tears soaking the pages. In the mornings, I brewed his coffee in the same old pot, sat at the kitchen table where he once sat, and opened a new book, turning pages like I was peeling away layers of my own life. With each entry, I began to see my childhood differently. I remembered the field trip to the Science Museum, when I thought his refusal to chaperone was proof of indifference. But in the diary, he wrote, I wish I could take the day off work to go with her, but if I miss this shift, we can't pay the electric bill. I left a note in her bag to make her laugh. I hope she knows I'm there in spirit. I love her. I thought back to that note, don't feed the dinosaurs. At 9 years old, I had laughed, then grown angry, dismissing it as a joke instead of love. Now, reading his words, I saw it for what it was, the closest he could come to saying what I longed to hear. I remembered the night in middle school when I came home humiliated from a cruel joke in the locker room. He had fixed the cabinet hinge while I hovered, aching for comfort he didn't offer. In his diary, I found this. She came home upset tonight. I wanted to tell her she's stronger than the world will ever be, but I didn't know how. So I fixed the hinge because fixing something, anything, felt like the only way to show I cared. I love her. Tears blurred the ink. The hinge had been his way of holding me together when he didn't know how to hold me. I had mistaken the silence for neglect, when really it was love in a language I didn't yet understand. Memory after memory reappeared in sharper focus. The smoke detector he gave me on my birthday. I had mocked it as absurd, unromantic proof of his inability to express affection. But in his diary he wrote, "Bought Claire a new smoke detector for her birthday. She'll think it's silly, but if it ever saves her life, she'll know it was my way of loving her. I can't risk her safety. I love her." I sobbed into the pages, clutching the notebook to my chest. All those years I had begged for 3 words, and all along he had been shouting them in every way he knew, just not with his mouth. The more I read, the more my anger softened, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. I thought of the arguments, the cruel words I had hurled. "You don't love me. You never loved Mom." I had wanted to wound him, to drag a confession out of him. Instead, I had carved scars into a man who was already carrying more than I knew. One entry from the year after Mom's death nearly undid me. "Claire thinks I didn't love her mother. God, if she only knew. Every morning I make coffee, I half expect to hear her humming in the kitchen. The ache doesn't go away. I want to tell Claire that loving and losing is killing me too, but the words stick. I hope one day she'll understand that silence was never emptiness. It was grief. It was love. I love her." I closed the book and wept into my hands. All those nights I had screamed at him for not saying it. He had been writing it, pouring it into these pages, hoping the act of writing would keep him from breaking. Slowly, painfully, I began to forgive him. I walked through the house again, this time with new eyes. The boots by the door weren't just boots. They were proof of a man who rose before dawn to provide. The toolbox in the garage wasn't just tools. It was his way of ensuring I never faced a broken world unarmed. The photograph of me at 10 on his dresser wasn't just nostalgia. It was pride he hadn't known how to voice. Even the phrase that had haunted me, "take care of yourself," took on new meaning. I used to hear it as dismissal, as avoidance. But reading his diaries, I realized it was his shorthand, his terrified father's way of saying, "I love you. I can't always protect you, so promise me you'll protect yourself." It wasn't enough, not then. But now, with the diaries in my lap, I heard the love woven into the words. 4 words that had carried the weight of 3. The diaries didn't just rewrite my past, they reshaped my future. I thought of all the men I had dated, how I clung to their easy, "I love yous," how I mistrusted them at the same time. I realized I had been measuring them against a silence I couldn't explain. My father's inability to say it had made me doubt the sincerity of anyone who did. Now I saw that love could be both spoken and unspoken, loud and quiet, imperfect and true. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with the last diary open, I whispered into the empty house, "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't understand." And for the first time I felt peace. The next morning I carried the diaries to the porch and sat where he once sat, watching the rain. Portland rain had always felt heavy, but that day it felt cleansing. I imagined him beside me, silent as ever, sipping his coffee, both of us listening to the world. For once I didn't need him to speak. The words were already here, etched into the pages, etched into me. The diaries did more than heal my past. They reshaped my future. For weeks after I discovered them, I walked through the world differently, as if my father's words, his hidden, unspoken love, had been sewn into my skin. The ache of his silence had haunted me all my life, but now I saw silence for what it truly was, not a void, but another dialect of love. I began to notice the small gestures of affection everywhere. A mother tucking her child's scarf tighter against the cold. A husband placing his hand on the small of his wife's back as they crossed the street. Even the barista at the coffee shop who remembered my order without asking. They were all versions of the same truth. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. For so long I had believed my father's silence defined me, that because he never said, "I love you," I wasn't worthy of hearing it. But now I knew better. He had written those words thousands of times, in notebooks only I was meant to find. His love had been constant, if not spoken. And with that knowledge, the hole in me began to close. I decided I would not carry the silence forward. I would speak the words he couldn't. To my friends, I said, "I love you," without hesitation. To the man who would later become my husband, I said it first, unafraid. And when my daughter was born, I whispered it into her tiny ear every single day, determined she would never doubt what I once did. But more than speaking the words, I learned to live them, to leave notes in lunch boxes, to fix hinges without being asked, to show up in quiet ways that someday my child might understand as love. Because love is not either slash or, it is both the words and the deeds, the loud and the silent, the spoken and the written. One evening, years later, I sat with my daughter on the porch of our home. She asked me about her grandfather, the man she would never meet. I told her about his strong hands, his quiet eyes, his way of fixing things. And then I showed her one of the diaries. She traced her finger along the faded ink and whispered, "He loved you." "Yes," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "He did, every single day." That is the gift he left me, not only the knowledge of his love, but the reminder that sometimes we misunderstand those we need the most. And that forgiveness, even when it comes too late to say out loud, still matters. So here I am, sharing his story with you, hoping it reminds you to look closer at the people in your own life, to notice the ways they love you, even if they don't always say it, to forgive the silences and to speak the words while you still can. Because one day we all run out of time, and the only regret worse than not hearing, "I love you," is not saying it yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this journey, for listening to the story of a father and daughter bound by silence, healed by words on a page. From my heart to yours, I wish you health, peace, and happiness with the people you love. May your families be whole, your days be gentle, and your words never left unsaid. And if this story has touched you, if it has reminded you of someone you love, I invite you to stay with me here. Share your thoughts, your memories, your stories. And if you'd like to hear more, you can quietly subscribe. It's a simple way to keep walking together through these stories of family, loss, and love. Because in the end, we are all just searching for the same thing, to know without question that we were loved.